Kyle, I've seen this take trending on Twitter. Is Josh Allen the new age Philip Rivers?
No, that's not fair to Josh Allen. I love Philip Rivers. Philip Rivers was my childhood quarterback growing up in San Diego, but Philip Rivers was always the fourth or fifth best quarterback in the NFL. I think the closest comp in terms of like not in terms of playing style, but in terms of like where he falls into the hierarchy of great football players would probably be like the Drew Brees slash Russell Wilson camp. That would be the one that I think fits best for Josh Allen at this point because, Patrick Mahomes, it doesn't quite fit perfectly into this era because what was so unique about the Brady Manning rivalry was that Manning was always regarded as the better quarterback. He had more MVPs, he had higher passer ratings, most of his statistics were like he was regarded as the better quarterback than Tom Brady, but Tom Brady's teams were always coming out on top against Peyton Manning during the 2000s when that rivalry saw this, explosion in popularity of football and the NFL built their foundation of becoming America's most popular sport to kings of the American sports landscape. They built that on the Brady Manning rivalry. And what's different about this one is that the person who's regarded as the most skilled quarterback now and the one with the best physical abilities is also the better quarterback in the sense of Patrick Mahomes has now beaten Josh Allen 3 times in a row in the playoffs. And so at that point, I don't think it's really a Brady Manning rivalry, although I saw that they put Brady Manning rivalry graphics on the pregame, the little, the hype video that they show on CBS to get it going. And I was like, oh, I thought we were going to be responsible and not jump the gun on the Brady Manning stuff. Because if you're looking for a Brady Manning rivalry of sorts, and I'm going to put that in air quotes because there isn't a true Brady Manning rivalry anymore. If you're looking for something close to that, it's Mahomes and Joe Burrow. It's not Mahomes and Josh Allen. So Philip Rivers is a Hall of Fame quarterback, and Josh Allen as well as a Hall of Fame quarterback. But I think Josh Allen is probably in that Drew Brees camp of quarterbacks. If you're really looking for a comparison to the previous era that I don't really think exists exactly the same.
Well, I guess it would all come down to ultimately, does Josh Allen break through in the same way that Drew Brees broke through with New Orleans? Because we know Philip Rivers never broke through. And I think why a lot of people are drawing those comparisons is it just seemed like we hit a point where we stopped really putting Philip Rivers in the title discussions year after year. And it kind of feels like this Buffalo Bills team is starting to reach that breaking point as things start to progress. Like, yes, we accept that they're going to be good. Yes, we accept they might win the AFC East. But do we really truly see them as a title contender this year? Obviously, they got hot really at the end, and it's a lot more people started to believe and think, okay, yeah, this team could do it. Obviously, they beat Kansas City in the regular season. Third straight year they've done that as well. So people were thinking to themselves, okay, well, if there was ever a year they get past Kansas City, they go against the Ravens. The last time they faced the Ravens in the playoffs, we know that they were able to get the best of Lamar Jackson and company, get onto the Super Bowl. And then obviously you could beat either San Francisco or the Lions, respectively. Yet here again, they're stifled by their nemesis, Patrick Mahomes, who I didn't realize this. I completely forgot that the trade that brought Patrick Mahomes to Kansas City involved the Buffalo Bills. So it's just a bitter irony that they have to continue to choke down as they see once again Kansas City celebrating and getting to celebrate on their home field. We talked about Josh Allen earlier in the year when the Bills were really at their lowest, when they were 6-6. We talked about them as Ken Dorsey got fired, insert Joe Brady, and that was before they got their hot streak going. And we said some things such as like the Super Bowl window might already be closing just because Josh Allen's the type of player that breaks down. Now, what went right for the Buffalo Bills in this hot streak? Well, they found a running game. That was a good thing for them. They found their running game. James Cook actually looked like a legit RB1 at points throughout this stretch. They cut down on the turnovers, which we know that has been the biggest bugaboo of Josh Allen's career. The turnovers, those began cut down under the Joe Brady era versus the Ken Dorsey era was a revelation. We found out Sean McDermott's allegiances to Al-Qaeda, but, aside from that, like the Bills were really clicking on all cylinders and kind of dispelled a little bit of some of the issues that we mentioned early on for them. But can this team continue to age like fine wine? Will they get better? Will they get worse from here? I don't think Stefon Diggs is going to be on this team next year. Gabe Davis might not be on this team next year. So they have a lot of issues to work through. Kyle, what do you make of this Buffalo Bills team projecting into the future?
Okay, so projecting into the future, the outlook looks a little bit better than I thought it did at the start of the year. Because I kept bringing up this fact that, like, the Buffalo Bills have not drafted a Pro Bowler since the Josh Allen draft class of 2018. And this year kind of became a pivot because you saw some of those young players start to come into form. James Cook made a Pro Bowl at the running back position. Teron Johnson, who I think was a former fourth round pick for them. And if you'll remember that viral video of the player at the scouting combine who, when running the drill, turned the wrong way and got hit in the head by a pass that was coming the other direction, that was Teron Johnson. And that guy is now an all-pro cornerback in the NFL. So remember, kids, your dreams can still come true even after you become a viral sensation on the internet. So James Cook made a Pro Bowl this year. Teron Johnson made a Pro Bowl. They re-signed Ed Oliver, which I thought was an interesting choice, but Oliver had a great season this year, and he's a former first-round pick out there in Buffalo. Dalton Kincaid had a fantastic rookie season, and he's essentially their number 2 receiver at this point in the passing game. I mean, he was targeted 5 times in the Kansas City game, had 5 catches for 45 yards. So the outlook of the Bills looks better than it did at the start of the season because a lot of those young players finally did round into form. However, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done from the Buffalo Bills standpoint, especially if Stefon Diggs isn't going to be back next year, which I don't know what to do with that situation. I'm surprised with all of the NFL reporters
Yeah.
out there isn't more information about what's really going on there.
Create a pie chart of what you think the chances are that Stefon Diggs is going to be on this team.
Yeah, let's call it. I really don't know because I don't understand why they wouldn't want to bring him back even at the dollar figure that he's at. He played not great the back half of the season and their offense kind of changed, which we can dive more into why that's the case and why, if we dig deeper into that, why it's even more painful that they lost this football game. But Stefon Diggs had one of his worst, I think it was statistically the worst playoff game of his career against Kansas City. The back half of the season, he had the same PFF grades as I think it was like some backup receivers on non-playoff teams. Like he was not much of a factor there. So maybe they look up and say, thank you for helping the development of Josh Allen, but we believe this offense has outgrown you and your $20 million a year salary. I guess I would say maybe 60-40 that he's gone, like 60% he's gone, 40% he's back, but that's a totally uneducated guess as it comes to Diggs. But Buffalo has a lot of work to do, especially with Josh Allen now firmly in we're making $50 million a year. And even if we restructure his contract, the lowest it's going to get to is, I think, like a $27 million cap hit. Like they are firmly in the camp of our window to win with Josh Allen on the rookie contract is gone. And now we, the front office of Brandon Beane and likely Sean McDermott. I mean, I don't know what's happening with that, but the management is going to have to come through and do some talent evaluation to improve that team within the margins. And I will give them credit. They look a lot better 4 months later than they did at the start of the year because of the development of James Cook, Dalton Kincaid, Teron Johnson, guys like that stepping up and showing out this year has been a huge improvement for Buffalo's chances going forward.
Yeah, worst case, if Brady ends up having one more good year with them, hey, Daybon might be back on the market if things don't work out with the New York Giants. They could always bring him back next year. So, I mean, when it comes to Josh Allen, like we've seen some positive strides. Yes. I mean, again, the back half of the season, there was games in which he was just a total non-factor in the offense. I think there was one game where he had only 70 passing yards on the back.
I think
half
it was
of the
the
season.
Patriot game. I think it was the New England game.
No, I could remember them airing it out. I thought it was like even the Cowboys game or something like that. At least when we saw the mistakes start getting cut down, that was obviously when the Bills offense really started to come into its own. And if they could continue to build off this running game, because that was the biggest thing that we've been saying for the last couple of years, is like, why can't this Buffalo Bills team run the football with anyone besides Josh Allen? Because we know that that's just not a sustainable formula for winning, in the sense that Josh Allen, the way he plays, the way he absorbs contact, you could age like Big Ben. You could age like Cam Newton. Cam Newton, the back half of his career, it looked like it hurt every time he threw the football. You don't want that from Josh Allen, because we know that the arm talent that this guy has is phenomenal, a top tier level. In fact, so much so, again, going back to Stefon Diggs and the failures in that game, reel in that 64-yard catch, should be catch. Man, when it comes to Stefon Diggs, like you said, things have been weird for like over a calendar year. So I would lean more like 70-30 that he's not on this team next year. And I don't know necessarily how they go about replacing him, who that next guy in do they try and bring? Do they try and like go after like a guy like T. Higgins probably is going to be out there, right? Get someone like that. Targets. This is supposed to be a really good wide receiver draft. Maybe they try and make a trade to get one of these high end guys. If you tell me they got Roma Dunze or something on this team, or traded in the top 10, somehow got like someone like a Malik Nabbers, then oh my God, that's great. It's literally what happened to Stefon Diggs in Minnesota, where we trade you, move on from you, and then just get another rookie in here to just kick some ass. Like, hey, I'm sure there's going to be a trade market for Stefon Diggs, if they want one. Like, hey, maybe they just trade a problem for a problem with the Eagles, bring in AJ Brown, right? And that's essentially how it works.
God, that would be wild. By the way, just to the stats you mentioned. So yes, the Cowboys game was the one where they had a total of 93 or 94 passing yards. The Patriots game was the one that he had his worst passer rating of the season, which I thought was interesting. The against the Patriots, who were terrible and they still won the game. Josh Allen had 169 yards, no touchdowns, a pick, a fumble. It was not a good game. To the point about the receivers, and I think this leads into the point that I talked about on my podcast that I thought was so interesting yet brutal for Buffalo, is that after the 2021 playoff game between Buffalo and Kansas City, that's regarded as like maybe the best in NFL history, or like, I don't know what you think, but it's the best football game I've ever watched played. The Buffalo Kansas City 2021, 4 touchdowns in 2 minutes, 13 seconds. Mahomes ties the game, wins it in overtime. After that, Buffalo spent 2 years making a conscious effort to change the way that they ran their entire offense to prepare for that exact game against that exact team. And the NFL at large made this shift because if you noticed, like the last 2 seasons, offense has been at its lowest levels in 25 years over a 2-year period. And the reason that's the case is because teams have looked at the landscape of the league and essentially said, against the best offenses in the league, our best chance is to not necessarily slow the game down, but just if we run as few plays as possible, there's less variance for these high-powered offenses to score. Simultaneously, Kansas City, the gold standard for offense in the NFL, they made a conscious effort to move away from a explosive, high-powered offense that I used to say was guaranteed to score 30 in every game to an offense that was precision-based, involved Mahomes completing 15 or 16 straight passes, most of them in the short part of the field. And part of the reason they did that was just because they didn't want to pay Tyreek Hill. But the other part of it is that was kind of the direction the NFL was moving, was sit on the ball, dominate time of possession. You saw that 49ers-Packers game where Kyle Shanahan and Matt LaFleur were having like a Batman versus Superman battle of time of possession, as both teams were just obsessed with dominating time of possession. Buffalo made this conscious effort to move away from the high-powered, high-octane offenses that they had the first 2 years with Allen and Diggs, and specifically moved to a run-based, ball-dominant offense. Last year, when they had the best team in the NFL talent-wise, at the end of the season, they actively sacrificed games where they could have like dropped 35 on teams to establish the run. For years, they've been trying to find a running game outside of Josh Allen. And it finally all came together this year. James Cook was a Pro Bowler. They were able to run an offense that controlled ball possession. It made Stefon Diggs, their top-end receiver, almost obsolete at times. But they built an offense that was predicated on James Cook running the ball, dominating time of possession, using Josh Allen and RPOs. They completely changed the way they ran offense, specifically to play this game against Kansas City. And last year, the problem was in the playoffs, Cincinnati got up like 14-0 on them, and then Cincinnati could sit on the ball in a way that Buffalo wasn't able to, but that was just because they gave up 14 quick points in the first quarter of that playoff game last year. And so they get to this game, they have their offense humming. Kansas City scored on all 5 possessions they had to start the game, and were still losing. They were still losing despite scoring on all 5 of their possessions. And in the fourth quarter, Buffalo down 3, got the ball, sat on it for 6.5 minutes, executed the offense exactly the way they had planned to execute it, and then the kicker missed the kick. And when the kicker missed the kick, it was like, wow, everything we had tried to do to get ourselves to overtime
Yeah.
against Kansas City, to beat the precision offense of Kansas City, everything we did to plan for this exact game against this exact team all fell out the window as soon as the kicker missed the kick. And that's
Now,
just a brutal way to lose that game. And it leaves so
yeah.
many questions going forward.
Well, the one thing I just want to address with the kicker missing the kick is that would have just tied the game, right? So we would have just
Mhm.
been going to overtime, and at that point, anything can happen. And the Bills' defense certainly wasn't stopping Mahomes on the
But
tail end of that
remember,
game.
they changed the overtime rules for Josh Allen. They changed the overtime rules 2 years ago so that both teams would get the ball in overtime. And we just haven't had an overtime game in the 2 years since to test out the new overtime rules. But they specifically changed the overtime rules so that Josh Allen would get the ball in overtime of that game.
I understand, but at the same time, the assumption that a lot of Bills fans are jumping to that we would have won that game had we been able to make that kick. There was a lot of things that the Bills could have done to have won that game. First off, you could actually have just scored the touchdown instead of settling for a field goal had you been able to complete the drive with Josh Allen just, going after the wide open wide receivers. They had a guy that was literally running a drag route across the field, wide open, could have hit him, and you would have been able to first down, easy, keep the clock running. And if anything, obviously we know the 13 seconds was enough times for Mahomes a couple years ago, but even still, you would have been able to drag that clock down to less than a minute and maybe you score the touchdown. Probably you score the touchdown. Heck, run quarterback draw. That was working early on. You talked about them using Allen in the playoff game a couple years ago. He was really running successfully in this game again, too. He had a couple touchdowns, and it just seemed the second half, things started to shift as far as how Kansas City was playing it. Know that Tyler Bass is taking a lot of heat right now, but obviously I mentioned the Stefon Diggs drop earlier and mentioning Josh Allen's inability to spot a wide open receiver that's flashing in front of his face. Another issue that needs to be addressed and receive more criticism than it seems like it's actually receiving.
Andy, also it was that last possession when they had the ball. I think the closest they got was the Kansas City 26. And so I think it was that second down throw to Shakir that ended up coming up short of Shakir when he was kind of coming across towards the end zone. On that play, you
Yeah,
got to give credit to Chris Jones of Kansas City pushing the offensive lineman into Josh Allen to avoid that, to mess up the timing of that throw. Because if Allen has all the time in the world to make that throw, maybe they complete it, maybe they score a touchdown, and we're talking about this differently as well. There's so many
true.
factors at
I
play
will
there.
give that, but at the same time, he got lightly bumped. He got grazed,
Yeah.
relative to a guy of Josh Allen's size. He could be able to reposition himself and get a better throw in, get his feet underneath him. So Jones did a great job pushing the offensive lineman back into him, but Josh Allen panicked and just freaked out on that throw when he didn't have to. He could have
Yeah.
reset, scrambled a little bit, use his legs because again, we saw him using his legs throughout the game. And Josh Allen deserves a lot of criticism. Stefon Diggs deserves criticism. Tyler Bass, yeah, again, when we get to see a kicker miss a field goal late in the game, it's devastating. But at the same time, would have just tied the game, wouldn't have been the game winner. Not exactly the same situation as the 91 Super Bowl wide right. But obviously, if you're a Bills fan, it's tough to get over that kind of stuff. I get it.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And add into the fact that on defense, Kansas City essentially scored on every time they touched the football until the last drive of the game. And I will give them credit. They got to stop on the last drive of the game. But they scored on their first 5 possessions. McCole Hardman fumbled at the half-yard line, and then they got a punt on the possession that then set up the missed field goal. Kansas City averaged 9 yards per play for a good bulk of that game. 9 yards a play on that Buffalo defense. Like, Buffalo's defense was notoriously hurt, and they have some question marks to address. I think other than the wide receiver position, like some of those issues for their defensive backs and linebackers are going to be the bigger question marks when you talk about what comes next for
Yeah.
Buffalo. But they did a terrible job trying to
Well,
slow down that Kansas City offense.
injuries, like Matt Milano being hurt, Tre'Davious White being hurt, those are things that ideally you would get fixed. For Tre'Davious White, I know it's a different story because we're talking about a guy who literally had back-to-back devastating injuries. So if he ever comes back the same cornerback that he was prior, it remains to be seen. Von Miller getting old, he's on the back end of his career. So like when he comes back next year, like how's he going to be? How are they going to make that? Are they going to move some cap around? Or are they going to like make someone a cap casualty because of, the salary cap issues that they're facing? We'll see. But like, those are some of the things that if injuries break right for you in terms of the recovery process, those will fix themselves. The back seven issues you're talking about.
I
But
I
yeah,
guess you could say that, especially with Milano coming back. It's just I feel like they do have more questions than they have answers for. And I think one of the things that's really going to help is, I mentioned him earlier, Teron Johnson really coming into form as a slot corner has really, really helped what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, you're right. Some of those injuries coming back will help them. And Josh Allen, I mean, you can point to that last drive of the game again. And I keep going back to this because it's interesting. Like, even with the defensive faults, they were in a position to tie or win the game. And if Allen does what he says he does, which is reset, readjust, maybe scramble for 6 or 7 yards, or even 4 yards, makes that last play a little bit more deceptive, because after the incompletion to Shakir, you have a 3rd and 9. Kansas City kind of knows what's coming on the 3rd and 9. They didn't blitz. They dropped back 7 into coverage. Allen tried to scramble. They were able to seal the edge. He just had to throw it away. Like, they became entirely predictable at the end of the game, which isn't a bad thing when your offense is totally dominating against a defense for a good portion of the game. But when they became predictable, there was just that Kansas City's defense stepped up. And this is the second year in a row that in a big game, Kansas City's defense has stepped up strategically at big times. In the AFC Championship game last year, Chris Jones got a critical sack on Joe Burrow that led to the punt, and that was the last play the Bengals had on offense. Or I guess Butker's kick was not was yeah, Butker's kick was a walk-off in the AFC Championship game. So it was the last play that the Bengals had on offense. And then this year on 2nd and 9, defense stepped up. James Cook had -8 rushing yards -6 rushing yards on his final 4 carries. Like, Kansas City's defense stepped up big when they had to. And I think that also deserves some credit as we talk about Buffalo needing issues on defense, what the receivers are going to look like next year. Like, Kansas City's defense really did step up on that last drive of the game.
yeah,
And I don't want to make it seem like it was all these bum players that are going to get moved out at the end of the year by Buffalo. Yes, this was the
yeah.
worst of the 4 Buffalo teams that made the playoff, but they still have some very good players. Kansas City's defense did step up big time at the end, and Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. That offense kicked it into high gear once the playoffs rolled around.